I'd like to now ask Mr. Prakash Bakshi, who is the chairman of NABARD in India, to share his comments on the two papers with us for the next 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, friends. After almost 3 days of whatever had to be said has been said, whatever had to be questioned has been questioned, whatever had to be answered, well, that sentence cannot be easily completed, and that's why perhaps we're still in a plenary. The two papers addressing as energy poverty or information poverty, because providing agri-services is also a kind of information poverty, seem to be focusing on kind of opposite goals or outcomes, in the sense that one talks about livelihood promotion, the second talks about improving the quality of life, even if livelihood issue is still uncertain. But when you read both the papers together, you find that they are kind of complementary. Because if incomes improve, the quality of life and health will improve. If health improves because there is no smoke, well, there's more opportunity to have more incomes. And in that sense, they are complementary. In fact, I remember long back when I was working in a remote southern corner of India called Kerala, LFP to be precise. We realized that the solution to diarrhea, which was very widespread, was not taking people to hospitals, but providing safe drinking water and financing for safe drinking water. So health and microfinance and income issues are quite closely related. Both papers are, in a sense, an assorted collection of some programs, projects, or events, not necessarily representing what is happening in those countries or in those contexts in which these programs have been taken up, with not too much of evidence about the costs and impacts beyond some anecdotal evidence. Perhaps that was not even the purpose of compiling these papers. Since costs and impacts are not very explicitly discussed, the question of replicability of these programs or these issues is left to us, and that is what perhaps was the intention of the two papers, to bring home to us certain programs that have been taken up, and then if we find them useful in our own context, try to learn a little more about them and to adapt them to our situations rather than to adopt them. There are some information gaps. There are bits of inaccurate information, but all that can be pardoned. I think all those things do not really reduce the import of the papers. The products mentioned in both the papers are fairly non-controversial, in the sense that if solar lamps are good, if they remove smoke from life, and if they can be financed where certain savings can be made, well, they should be financed. I mean, there's no second question about it. In any case, they are kind of intermediate solutions, because ultimately the cheapest thing is perhaps grid power. Until this grid power reaches the poor, if it can reach the poor, we must find the best alternative. And I think that is the answer that I take from this paper, because if solar power alone was really the answer, this hall would have been lit by solar power and not by grid power. Biogas is mentioned in the paper. I used to think that this is an extremely important product, but not in too much detail. In fact, in India, we had almost 20 years back, supporting financing biogas projects or products was like a national mania. But unfortunately, it failed, because the product was not technically very efficient. The gas produced was not very good. You cannot transport that gas somewhere. There were locational disadvantages. You can't have a biogas plant next to your house if you are living in a congested place. There were a variety of reasons, but that does not reduce the importance of the product per se and the need to improve the technical efficiency of that product which unfortunately somewhere was left behind. To me, it appears, after 3 days of hearing what has been discussed, the problem of microfinance is not giving something like $50 at some rate of interest to some person somewhere and getting it back.
So curious.
The problem, as the Bragg paper has very, very clearly brought out, is how can you improve the capability of a person who is used to handle, say, a $50 enterprise to start handling a $500 enterprise? Because if that does not happen, even with all the microfinance that we are going to provide, he remains a $50 person. And that, I think, is the essence of the paper, which needs to be discussed in greater detail. For this, unfortunately, there is no ready-made answer which can be universally applied, especially in agriculture, which is highly dependent on local conditions, local soil, local water availability, local climate, so far as production is concerned. And agriculture is also dependent on the so-called non-local issues, a slightly larger context, so far as incomes and profitability are concerned, because markets are quite often away from the local production centers. Agriculture is a very general, vague word. There are different crops. There are short duration crops, like, say, growing wheat or rice or vegetables. When I say rice and vegetables, they are again two different things. One is perishable, another is not perishable. There are other long-term crops like, say, cocoa or coffee or tea. All financing for all these requires different types of loan products, different types of technologies. And for every activity, there are different technical and financial parameters which need to be kept in mind while designing loan products. Seasonality is one of the most important things, something which has been discussed over the past 2 days, although agriculture was not always the focus. So lending products, practices, tenors of loans, repayments, how to schedule repayments, these are all very different for all these different activities which I have mentioned. Vegetables require different types of loan product, and rice requires totally different, and tea requires a totally different. A comment has been made in the paper which is important, and which says, and I quote, "Where all producers are subject to a common set of weather and perhaps other risks, when one cannot pay, often no one can pay, and therefore the conclusion that the group guarantee is futile." Quite true. If crop fails for one farmer, most probably that crop would have failed for many other neighboring farmers. And therefore, we need something more, something again which was discussed in the plenary session, than the first plenary session yesterday. Maybe we have to reschedule those loans. We have to provide top-up finance despite not getting the repayment. In India, we have tried with something what is called a cyclical credit, not with too much of success, but we are experimenting, and somewhere we hope we'll really be able to develop a product. Because crop fails not every year, but in kind of a cycle of 3 or 4 or 5 years. So can we think of a loan product which has a 5-year cycle where some years would be good, some years will be bad, and when the years are good, the importance of a savings product arises, something which has started filtering into the Microcredit Summit vocabulary now, after almost 8 or 10 years. The savings word has become important. We have seen all that. But as I said, moving from a $50 enterprise, agriculture enterprise, to perhaps a $100 or $200 or a $300 agriculture enterprise, when the land size that you own almost remains the same or perhaps grows smaller and smaller because of division of land, requires one to move from one level of technology to another level of technology. Where perhaps change of crops will be required, perhaps new investments will be required which the farmer has never used, new practices will be required which the farmer is totally unaware of, something which the Bragg paper has discussed in not too much detail, but it has been discussed, it has been mentioned. The question is that when this is to be done, when the farmer is to be transformed to a different platform, when in the language of Professor Claudio, it will be moving the production function from one level to another. But when we have to do that, the question is the farmer required to pay for all that? Or somebody else should pay for that also? After all, the farmer is growing food, which is going to be eaten by all of us, and most of us produce, to use very sarcastic term, only waste paper. So when farmer has to produce for the food security of the country or the world, I think the country and the world will also have to learn to pay for shifting that farmer from one level to another. And this requires building partnerships. It is one thing to say, as the Bragg paper says, that we will do everything, right from seed production to marketing. It is not always easy to do so. Most institutions, whether they are large institutions or small institutions, would not be able to do so. It's quite a complex thing, and we need to learn to build partnerships. In India, we have built huge partnerships which relate right from agriculture research to marketing. Yes, I'll just take, Sam, if you'll permit me, 40 seconds more. The paper has made some remarks, and it said that, for example, the entire value chain should be financed. Let me assure you, friends, that financing a value chain is not within the realms of microfinance. Understanding a value chain itself is very difficult. It's a very complex thing. Using ICT solutions, well, as I said, if the farmer has to be transformed from one platform to another, ICT solutions will not help. Maybe a traditional training methodology will be required. But there can be ICT solutions for market information, for weather information, and for immediately required agronomic practices. So SMSs, voice SMSs, web-based information, we have in India tried everything, and in different pockets, different things are working. Well, these will work. So the basic problem, I feel, so far as incomes are concerned, because as my colleague said, the farm holding there is less than what, half an acre, you said. In India, 90% farmers own less than 2 hectares. And when you have product which comes from that small piece of land, you do not have bargaining power. The problem with us is problems of aggregation. We are trying to struggle with that in India, whether farming collective is an answer, whether producer company is an answer, whether a cooperative is an answer, whether contract farming is an answer, whether collective warehouse receipt trading is an answer, I do not know. We are experimenting with all of them. But unless we experiment with many new products, financial and non-financial, we'll never be able to help the small farmer. Thank you so much.